I was living alone in a small rental house just outside of town when this happened. It was a one-story place at the end of a short, dead-end road. There were only 5 houses on the entire street, and at night it was usually incredibly quiet. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, so most days I did not leave the house unless I absolutely had to get groceries or run a quick errand. I did not get visitors very often. In fact, my friends usually texted me well before coming over, so I was used to a very quiet, predictable routine. That is why the first knock stood out so much. It was around 8:45 at night on a Thursday. I was sitting in my living room watching television, relaxing after a long day of staring at a computer screen, when I heard 4 firm, deliberate knocks on the front door. I muted the television and waited. I sat there on the couch, completely still, thinking maybe I had just imagined it. But then there were 2 more knocks, just as loud and firm as the first ones. I got up and walked slowly toward the door. There was a small peephole right in the center of it. When I looked through, I saw a man standing on my front porch, holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He was wearing a dark, heavy jacket and a baseball cap pulled down slightly. He looked completely normal, maybe in his mid-30s, just like any delivery driver you would expect to see. I opened the door, but I made sure to keep the security chain on. He immediately looked up and said that he had a delivery that required a signature. He held up a small, handheld digital device and read a name off it. But the problem was, it was not my name. It was not even close to my name. I told him straight out that he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at his digital device, and then back up at me. He read the address out loud, and it was indeed my exact address. I told him again that no one by that name lived here, and that I was the only tenant. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary, just holding my gaze through the gap in the door. Then he said he must have been given the wrong information, and would take the package back to his truck. I watched him walk back down my driveway. I expected to see a delivery van or at least a regular car parked somewhere nearby, but there was absolutely nothing. He just walked past my mailbox and turned the corner at the end of the street. I did not see where he went. I shut the door, locked it, and put the deadbolt in place. I told myself it was just a driver for a small local company, or maybe a contractor using a personal vehicle. But the next night, at almost the exact same time, there were 3 knocks again. This time, I did not open the door right away. I went straight to the peephole first. I looked through, and my heart sank a little when I saw it was the exact same man, with the same dark jacket and the same cardboard box. I did not open the door this time. I just spoke loudly through the wood and told him that he had already come by yesterday, and that no one with that name lived at this address. He did not answer right away. There was a brief silence, and then he said he just needed a signature, and that his system showed the package absolutely had to be delivered tonight. I told him firmly that I was not signing for someone I did not know, and that he needed to leave. There was a very long, uncomfortable pause. Then he finally said okay and stepped back from the door. I stayed at the peephole, watching his every move. Instead of walking away down the driveway, he stood at the edge of the porch, looking around. He slowly turned his head toward my front windows, then toward the side of the house, and then back at the door. It felt like he was studying the layout. After about 15 seconds, he finally turned and walked down the driveway. Once again, I saw no vehicle of any kind. That was when it started to feel really wrong, and a cold sense of dread began to settle in my stomach. On the 3rd night, there was no knock at all. I actually felt a wave of relief wash over me. I sat in my living room and thought that maybe he had finally figured out the mistake and went on his way. I even joked to myself about how weird it would have been if he had showed up for a 3rd time. But my relief was short-lived. On the 4th night, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes around 9 o'clock in the evening when I heard 4 knocks. But the problem was, they were not on the front door. They were on the side of the house, right against the dining room window. I froze, turned off the running water, and slowly walked into the dining room. I looked toward the window, but the blinds were drawn, and I could not see anything. Then, suddenly, there were 4 more knocks, but this time they were back at the front door. I hurried to the front hallway and looked through the peephole. It was him again, but this time he was not holding a cardboard box. His hands were completely empty. I did not say a word, and after a few seconds he knocked again, harder this time. Then he stepped back and stared directly into the peephole, almost as if he knew I was standing right on the other side, looking back at him. I stepped away from the door so he could not see any shadow or movement, and I remained absolutely silent. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before I dared to check any of the windows. I walked around the house with all the lights turned off, carefully parting the blinds to look outside. I saw him standing across the street near the tree line. He was just standing there in the shadows, completely still, facing my house. After maybe a minute, he walked off into the darkness. I went around and double-checked every single lock on every window and door, even though I knew they were already secured. The next day, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained the entire situation. The officer I spoke with listened patiently and told me that it sounded like someone was trying to verify occupancy. He explained that burglars often use this tactic. They will knock on a door to see if anyone answers before trying to break in later. He told me to install security cameras if I could, and to call 911 immediately if the man came back. That night, I decided to leave all the lights off in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom at the back. Around 8:45, right on time, there were 4 knocks at the front door. I stayed in my bed and did not respond at all. After a few seconds, there were 4 more knocks, and then total silence. I waited about a minute, holding my breath. Then I heard something else. It was a soft, dull thud against the back of my house, followed by another one. I realized with horror that someone was testing the back door. I grabbed my phone, slipped out of bed, and quietly walked into the hallway. I could hear the metal back doorknob turning slowly, stopping, and then turning again. I called 911, just as the officer had instructed, and whispered to the dispatcher that someone was actively trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the loud knocking started up again at the front door. The dispatcher told me that officers were already on their way, but it felt like an eternity. The back doorknob kept turning, and I could hear muffled whispers, which meant there was more than one person out there. Then I heard the distinct sound of something metal scraping lightly against the doorframe. After about 30 seconds of this, everything suddenly stopped and went silent. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher until I saw the blue lights flashing through my windows. When the police searched the outside of the house, they found fresh pry marks on the back door, right near the handle. The officer told me that if I had not been home, the door likely would have been forced open within minutes. They drove around the surrounding streets, but did not find anyone suspicious that night. The next night, I decided I could not stay there anymore, so I went to stay at my brother's apartment across town. I did not post anything about it on social media, and I did not tell anyone else that I was leaving. Around 9 o'clock that evening, my phone rang. It was my neighbor who lived 2 houses down. She told me that there was a man standing on my front porch, knocking repeatedly on my door. She said he had been standing there for at least 5 minutes, and she wanted to know if I was home. I told her no, and I asked her if she could see a vehicle. She said she did not see any car parked nearby. I told her to hang up and call the police immediately. The officers arrived quickly this time and managed to catch the man on my porch. They questioned him, and later that night, an officer called to give me an update. He said the man claimed he was just trying to deliver a package but had misplaced it. He had no company identification, no delivery uniform, and no marked vehicle. Since they did not catch him actively breaking in, they could only warn him to stay away from the property and let him go. But the story did not end there. 2 days later, the police arrested him in a nearby neighborhood after he was caught red-handed, attempting to break into a house where the owner was away on vacation. When they searched his personal car, they found multiple empty cardboard boxes and a small handheld digital scanner that was not connected to any real delivery database. During his interrogation, he finally admitted to his entire scheme. He told detectives that he would knock on doors with a fake package. If someone answered, he would make up a story about a wrong address, leave and mark the house as occupied. But if no one answered after multiple attempts, he would return later that night and force his way inside. He also admitted that he would sometimes knock several nights in a row just to observe the pattern of the house. If the lights were on one night and completely dark the next, he would assume the residents were out of town and target the home. Hearing that made me realize just how close I had come to disaster. If I had ignored the door on one of those early nights, or if I had gone out, he probably would have broken in while expecting an empty house. I moved out of that rental home 3 months later when my lease finally ended. Even now, I never answer the door at night unless I am expecting someone, and if a stranger shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I do not go anywhere near the door. But that was not the only time a quiet residential neighborhood became the setting for a lingering, terrifying mystery. If we travel across the ocean to a quiet suburb near Glasgow, Scotland, we find another family who experienced the creeping dread of mysterious knocks at their door. This story began in the chilly lead-up to Christmas. To set the scene, the narrator was 16, about to turn 17, and was living with their parents, siblings, cats, and dogs in a cozy, multi-story home. They were a very close-knit family, and they often spent their winter evenings gathered together in the living room, watching holiday movies, playing board games, and just catching up on life. During one of those late nights together, the family was sitting on the couch watching A Christmas Carol. The room was warm, the holiday decorations were glowing, and everything felt completely safe. But during the middle of the movie, they heard a loud knock at the front door. Since it was the holiday season, they did not think much of it, assuming it was a neighbor or a delivery. The mother got up to answer it, but when she opened the door, the street was completely empty. Their garden wrapped around from the front of the house to the back. So she walked out and checked along the side path, but there was absolutely nobody there. She came back inside, slightly confused, and they resumed watching their movie. A few days later, the teenager was sitting at the living room table, focusing deeply on some high school exam preparation work. In the middle of their studying, they heard another knock at the front door. They paused their work, got up, and went to answer it. But once again, when they opened the door, the front porch was empty. At this point, the family assumed it was just local kids playing a prank. In Scotland, there is a popular neighborhood game called Chappie, where kids will knock on someone's door and then run away as fast as they can, laughing from the safety of the shadows. It is a silly, frustrating game, but when you are a kid, the quick rush of adrenaline can be weirdly fun. The family had a group chat where they kept each other updated on daily events. And throughout that week, several family members started posting that they had experienced the exact same random knocks at the door, but the incident that stood out the most happened to the father. He usually stayed up much later than everyone else, either playing video games on his Xbox or watching television once the rest of the house had gone to sleep. One night, around 11:30, when the entire street was completely silent and all the neighborhood kids would have been long inside their homes, the father heard a very quiet, faint knock. He was confused because of how late it was. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole, but he saw nothing but darkness. He slowly unlocked and opened the door to look outside, but the street was quiet and totally empty. He locked up and went upstairs to ask if anyone else had heard it, but because the knock was so faint, everyone else had been fast asleep. This started to really unsettle the family. It had been happening repeatedly for weeks, and yet nobody had ever heard footprints running away, nor had they seen anyone hiding in the yard. Usually, when kids play Chappie, you can hear them whispering or running down the street, but this was always followed by absolute silence. And then, Christmas Day arrived, and the knocking stopped for a brief moment. The family spent a wonderful day together, opening presents, sharing gifts, playing games, and eating far too much holiday food. But later that night, the teenagers started to feel sick from overeating, which was a common occurrence for them on Christmas. They decided to go upstairs to their bedroom to lie down and rest. They ended up falling into a deep sleep and woke up hours later in the middle of the night. When they checked their phone, the screen read 2:01 in the morning. The entire house was completely dark and dead silent. Knowing they would not be able to fall back asleep anytime soon, they decided to stay in bed and scroll through social media on their phone, keeping the lights off so they would not wake anyone else. They were messaging some friends who were also awake and watching holiday videos, just enjoying the quiet freedom of the school break. But after a while, they heard a faint, distinct knock. It was hard to tell if it came from the bedroom door, the window, or if they had simply imagined it. They sat up straight in bed, staring into the dark room with their heart racing. They did not want to make a single movement. They knew that absolutely nobody should be outside at 2 o'clock in the morning on Christmas night. They started to wonder if the constant knocking from the past few weeks was finally getting to their head, or if there was actually someone lurking outside. Since their bedroom was on the second floor, the idea of someone knocking on their window seemed highly unlikely, which made the sound even more terrifying. After what felt like an eternity, they finally worked up the courage to slide out of bed and crack their bedroom door open. As they did, they heard the distinct sound of heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Their brain immediately tried to rationalize the sound, assuming it was just their dad coming up to bed after staying up late like he always did. They stepped out into the hallway, preparing to tell him that they were still awake and had heard a weird knocking sound. But the problem was, it was not their father. When they looked toward the top of the stairs, they saw a man they had never seen before in their life. He was staggering as he climbed, holding onto the banister, and he looked heavily intoxicated. The teenager felt a wave of intense nausea hit them. They realized that this stranger had somehow bypassed the locked doors and was now inside their home. They slowly and quietly backed into their bedroom, thankfully without the man noticing them, and gently clicked the door shut. They stood there in the dark, listening as the man staggered down the hallway. They could hear him opening doors, stepping into each room one by one. They knew it was only a matter of time before he turned the handle to their bedroom. They completely froze, their mind going blank, as all common sense seemed to vanish in the face of pure panic. After a few agonizing moments, they slowly opened their door just a crack and saw the man exiting their younger sister's bedroom. At this point, their survival instinct finally kicked back in. They ran past the man, rushed into their parents' bedroom, and frantically shook them awake, whispering that there was an unknown man inside the house. The mother woke up instantly, while the father was still groggy and disoriented. Together, they crept out of the bedroom and went downstairs to investigate. When they reached the living room, they found the intruder completely passed out on their couch. He had found the father's beers, opened several of them, and scattered the cans all over the table and floor. The mother, furious and terrified, began shouting at him to get out of their house. The man stirred, woke up slightly, and angrily insisted that the house belonged to him, telling them that they were the ones who needed to leave. They tried to pull him off the couch, but he was completely dead weight and refused to move. The mother even slapped him across the face to try and snap him out of his drunken state, but he barely reacted. A few moments later, the father came fully downstairs, saw the stranger on his couch, and immediately took control of the situation. He used his physical strength to lift the heavy man off the couch, dragged him toward the side door of the house, and forcefully pushed him out into the cold night, warning him to never come back before slamming the door and locking it. They thought the nightmare was finally over, but seconds later, the side window suddenly shattered inward. The man had swung his fist through the glass, sending sharp shards flying across the room. He then shoved his bleeding face through the broken pane, staring at them with wide, angry eyes, looking like something straight out of a horror movie. While the father ran to call the police, the man began screaming aggressive threats, telling them that he knew what they looked like, that he would come back, and that he was going to take his house back. The family stood there in absolute shock, unable to believe that this was happening on Christmas night. Eventually, the man stumbled away into the dark, and the police arrived a short time later to take detailed statements from everyone. Luckily, it had snowed heavily that night, which was a rare occurrence for that part of Scotland. When the police went outside, they easily found a clear trail of red blood drops fresh in the white snow. They followed the trail down the street and into a nearby public playground, where they found the intruder collapsed on the ground, his hands covered in deep cuts and glass shards. They arrested him immediately. It turns out, the man had actually lived in that exact house years before the family had moved in. He claimed that he had no bad intentions, and that he had simply drank far too much with his friends, lost his bearings, and accidentally broken into his old home, thinking he still lived there. The teenager ended up getting a restraining order against him because of the violent threats he made, and the man was ordered to pay for the window and complete community service. But to this day, the family still has no explanation for the mysterious knocking that had been happening for weeks leading up to that night. The police confirmed the man had no connection to those prior events, leaving the family to wonder if there was someone else out there, watching and knocking in the dark. Sometimes, these uninvited guests do not just knock to see if you are home, and they do not just stumble in by drunken mistake. Sometimes they watch from the shadows for weeks, waiting for the absolute perfect moment to slip inside when you are at your most vulnerable. This is exactly what happened to a young family living in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. Back in the year 2010, the narrator was only about 6 years old at the time, living in a cozy duplex with their older brother, older sister, and their mother. The father was a military service member and was deployed overseas at the time, which always took a heavy emotional toll on the young narrator, who was incredibly close to him. One late, rainy night, the narrator was sitting on the front porch with their mother. The air was cold, but they were enjoying the peaceful sound of the heavy Oregon rain while the mother smoked a cigarette. But as they sat there, they noticed a figure walking down the very middle of the dark road. The man was wearing an oversized bright yellow rain jacket that immediately caught their attention because it was incredibly late and the street was usually completely empty at that hour. They watched him silent and curious, but their curiosity quickly turned to concern when the man altered his path and began walking directly toward their driveway. The mother stood up, extinguished her cigarette, and grabbed the narrator's hand. They watched in fear as the man stopped walking right next to the garbage cans at the edge of their driveway. The mother turned to quickly lead the narrator inside, and that is when the man in the yellow jacket began screaming at them. The narrator was too young to remember the exact words, but the sheer anger and aggression in his voice was terrifying. The mother rushed the narrator inside, slammed the heavy door, and locked it securely before turning off all the lights in the house to make it look like they were asleep. The narrator was crying, completely terrified by the sudden hostility. The mother quickly gathered all 3 of her children, shushing them gently, and brought them into her king-sized bed so they could all stay together. For a while, nothing else happened, and the house remained quiet, allowing them to eventually drift off to sleep. But that night, the narrator had a horrible nightmare that they can still vividly recall to this day. In the dream, the man in the big yellow rain jacket was standing right outside, peering through their bedroom window. The narrator woke up sobbing and shaking, physically trembling as they reached over to wake up their older sister, to tell her how scared they were. The sister got out of bed and walked the young narrator into the bathroom that was attached to the master bedroom, shutting the door behind them. She spoke to the narrator in a soft, comforting voice, trying to calm them down without waking up the mother or brother. But while they were standing in the quiet bathroom, they suddenly heard a massive, violent banging sound coming from the front door. It was so loud that the sister burst out of the bathroom and ran to shake their mother awake. The brother woke up from the noise as well. The mother quickly motioned for the 3 children to get back into the bathroom and stay together. They huddled on the floor, crying and terrified, as the violent banging on the front door continued. The mother ran around the dark bedroom, desperately searching for her old BlackBerry phone so she could call the police, but she could not find it anywhere. This meant they had no way to call for help, and they were completely isolated. They sat on the bathroom floor in complete silence, listening to the man outside screaming and yelling for them to let him in, all while he continued to throw his body against the front door. It felt like a completely hopeless situation. Their father, who was normally their protector, was thousands of miles away, and they were entirely defenseless. They prayed that one of their close neighbors would hear the screaming and call the police, but the minutes dragged on and no sirens ever came. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the screaming stopped and the man walked away. The family was too terrified to sleep, but they eventually drifted off as the sun began to rise. What was truly strange was that they lived in a tight-knit duplex where the walls were incredibly thin, yet not a single neighbor had reported hearing the disturbance. Everything seemed to return to normal for a few weeks, and the family began to move past the terrifying incident. But then, they woke up one morning to a chilling discovery. The front door of their home was standing wide open, letting in the cold morning air. When they looked around, they saw that one of the side windows was also wide open, and a large, clean hole had been cut directly into the window screen. The mother immediately found her phone and called the police. As they looked through the house, they realized that several random items were missing. The narrator's piggy bank, which contained all of their hard-earned holiday savings, had been stolen. But the most disturbing thing that was taken was a large decorative glass vase filled with months of saved cash and coins. The sickening part was that this vase had been sitting right on the nightstand, directly next to the bed where the mother and all 3 children had been sleeping. The intruder had stood inches away from their sleeping faces to steal it. The police investigated the break-in, but the intruder was never caught, and the case eventually went cold. Sadly, the mother passed away years later, and because the father was deployed when it happened, many details of the police investigation were lost to time. It was never officially confirmed if the man in the yellow raincoat was the same person who eventually broke into their home, but the narrator always suspected a connection. Interestingly, a few months after the burglary, the narrator was walking by a neighbor's house down the street. This neighbor was a quiet, older man who lived completely alone and rarely spoke to anyone. Sitting right on his front porch, in plain view, was a large glass vase that looked identical to the one that had been stolen from their nightstand. But without proof, they could never be sure, leaving the family with a lingering sense of unease that never truly went away. And finally, we have the story of 2 young men who found themselves targeted by a silent, creeping presence in a remote town in Idaho. This happened about 3 years ago, while the narrator and his missionary companion, whom we will call Spencer, were serving a full-time mission. The small town they were assigned to was incredibly isolated, surrounded by miles of empty fields and thick forests, which meant there was very little for them to do in the evenings. The narrator was going through a particularly difficult personal stretch at the time, dealing with low self-esteem and severe insomnia, which made their long days of missionary work feel even more exhausting. Because of the remote nature of the area, they were not living in a standard apartment like most missionaries. Instead, they rented a tiny standalone house situated on a large plot of land. The layout of the small house was simple. When you walked through the front door, you entered a main living area, where their study desks were set up. Immediately to the right of the entrance was their small bedroom. If you walked straight through the living area, you went through a wide open archway that led directly into the kitchen. To the right of the kitchen was a small bathroom, and to the left was a tiny laundry utility closet. Although the house stood alone, their landlord's house was located on the adjacent property, just a short walk away, which gave them a small sense of security. On this particular night, the narrator was sitting at his desk in the living room, scrolling through his phone. His chair was turned to face the open kitchen archway. Spencer was sitting in the bedroom, also on his phone, winding down for the night. It had been dark outside for several hours, and the surrounding countryside was completely silent. But in the middle of this quiet evening, the narrator heard a single, sharp knock. The sound came from the window located directly above the kitchen sink. Because of the open layout of the house, anyone standing outside that window would have a clear, unobstructed view of the entire living room, including exactly where the narrator was sitting. The narrator froze and stared at the dark kitchen window for a few seconds, but he saw nothing but the black reflection of the room. He tried to brush it off, thinking it must have been a tree branch brushing against the glass. There were several large trees behind the house, but as he sat there, He realized that the trees were far too far away to reach the window, and a wooden branch would not make such a sharp, metallic knocking sound. In the middle of having this thought, he heard another sharp knock. But this time, it came from the window around the corner in the laundry room. The full weight of the situation finally hit him. Someone was actively walking around their tiny home in the pitch black, knocking on the windows. He slowly stood up and began walking toward the bedroom to tell Spencer what was happening, but before he could reach the door, a third knock sounded. This one was incredibly loud, and it came from the living room window, right next to where he had been sitting just seconds before. The narrator did not look to see who was on the other side of the glass. He bolted into the bedroom, shut the door, and locked it. He asked Spencer if he had heard the sounds, and Spencer nodded, his face pale. They began to whisper, debating what they should do. The only potential weapons they had in the house were a couple of small kitchen knives, and they had no idea how many people were outside, or if they were carrying weapons. Going outside to confront the intruder was out of the question. During their frantic discussion, the knocking sound moved from the windows to the heavy wooden front door itself. The knocks were slow, steady, and rhythmic, which made them feel even more deliberate. They briefly considered calling the local police, but they were in such a remote area that they knew it would take deputies at least 30 minutes to arrive. Then, Spencer remembered they had their landlord's phone number. He quickly dialed the number and explained the situation in a rushed whisper. While he was on the phone, the knocking at the front door stopped, and the house went completely silent for a couple of minutes. But the narrator knew that the person outside had not left. He waited in absolute dread, staring at the bedroom window, and then, right on cue, a sharp knock sounded directly against the bedroom glass. The heavy blinds were closed, so they could not see the person's face, and the person could not see them, but the sheer proximity of the sound made them jump. Spencer told the landlord that the intruder was now at their bedroom window. The landlord told them to stay locked in the room, and said he was walking over right now with his shotgun. They waited in silence for another 5 minutes, holding their breath, until they finally heard the landlord's voice calling out from the front porch. They unlocked the bedroom door and ran to let him in. The landlord was standing there with his shotgun, looking around the dark yard. They asked him if he had seen the person, and he told them that as he was walking down his driveway, he saw the headlights of a pickup truck turn on, and the vehicle quickly sped away down the dirt road. He had not been close enough to get a license plate or a clear description of the truck. The narrator, Spencer, and the landlord grabbed heavy flashlights and went outside to inspect the perimeter of the house. There were small patches of snow left on the ground from a storm that had passed through a few days prior. In the white patches, they found a single clear set of boot footprints. The tracks circled the entire house, stopping directly beneath every single window where they had heard the knocks. They debated calling the sheriff's office, but they knew that with the truck already gone and no physical description, there was very little the police could do. The landlord told them to keep their doors locked and to call him immediately if they heard anything else, before heading back to his own house. The two missionaries went back inside, locked every security latch, and tried to get some sleep, but they spent the rest of the night staring at the ceiling. They tried to rationalize what had happened, wondering if it was a harmless prank by other missionaries in the area. But it was well past their strict curfew, and the closest companion pair lived over 20 minutes away. They also considered that it might have been some teenagers from their local church congregation. But usually, pranksters would stick around to laugh or reveal themselves, whereas this person had remained completely silent and fled the moment the landlord approached. When they asked around the next day, no one ever admitted to the incident. For the rest of his time in that remote Idaho town, the narrator's insomnia grew significantly worse. Every time the wind blew or a branch scraped against the house, he would wake up in a cold sweat, thinking the whispering knocker had returned. But the scariest part of the entire experience was not the knocking itself, or the fact that only a thin pane of glass had separated them from a stranger. It was the realization that when the first knock had occurred at the kitchen window, The narrator had looked directly at the glass. In that moment of darkness, the person standing outside had likely been staring straight back at him through the glass, watching him as he sat completely unaware in the light of the living room. These stories serve as a chilling reminder that our homes, which we often view as impenetrable sanctuaries, are sometimes far more vulnerable than we care to admit. Whether it is a calculated criminal using a fake package to search for empty houses, a disoriented former resident returning to a past life, a hostile stranger lurking in a yellow raincoat, or a silent stalker circling a remote cabin in the dead of winter, the safety of our walls can be shattered by a simple, unexpected sound. And sometimes, the most terrifying thing of all is not the threat we can see, but the silent, unseen eyes watching us from the darkness, waiting for the perfect moment to knock. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.